On this week's NESN Patriots podcast, we will be recapping Patriots' third preseason game against the Carolina Panthers and previewing not only the fourth and final preseason game, but also roster cuts. Hello and welcome to this week's NESN Patriots podcast. I'm Doug Kai, joined as always by Zach Cox. Zach, how are you doing?
Doing well, Doug. Quite honestly, I'm kind of ready to just fly straight past this fourth preseason game and get right into the regular season. It tends to be a little bit of a grind this week 4 of the preseason here, but we're almost there. Almost at week 1, almost at roster cuts. Exciting times.
Yeah, it is sort of one of those necessary evil type games, and it's also one where I think there's, to quote a song, I think from the Lizzie McGuire movie, this is the game where dreams are made of.
What a throwback that was.
I think,
do you have that prepared, or is that top of the
No,
head?
that was top of the noggin. When I was in high school, I think there was like a day off from school or something, and I paid to rent that movie with my girlfriend at the time in coins. I don't even know how old I was at the time. I just remember going to Nat Video at Cobb's Corner in Canton with like a pile of coins. All right, so that was an aside. Right,
I remember that exact song that you're talking about.
Yeah. So this is the game where dreams are made of for players who probably will not be making the Patriots roster and are basically getting their film out for other NFL teams. And actually, in the past couple of years, we've seen this happen for the Patriots. Jacoby Myers had the greatest preseason performance in NFL history.
Jacoby Brissett.
Jacoby Brissett had the greatest preseason performance in NFL history against the Giants a couple of years back. That led to him being traded to the Colts. And now he's the Colts starting quarterback. And then last season, Danny Etling had an 85 or 86-yard touchdown run. That led to him being moved to wide receiver, which didn't work out so well. But now he's a quarterback on the Falcons. So crazy things can happen in these fourth and final preseason games, even though they are very boring to watch usually.
Definitely. And you do see some kind of more generic players kind of playing their way into roster spots. Maybe not exactly through anything they've done in this final preseason game, but we've seen guys kind of solidify their spots in years past. J.C. Jackson is the first guy that comes to mind.
Yeah.
He had a very good summer, a very good preseason last year, but came down with 2 interceptions in that game against the Giants last year, and that's what really kind of solidified him there in that spot. I think probably pushed him past maybe someone like Cyrus Jones on the and onto the active roster. And in years past, there's been guys like DJ Foster and Michael Buchanan a couple of years back. Most of those guys didn't last too long once they did make the roster, but there are a few. It seems like every year there's 1 or 2 guys that sort of stand out, and then, like you said, either work their way onto the Patriots roster or find some way to link up somewhere else.
We will be talking a little bit about players to watch in that game a little bit later, but let's kick it off with probably the biggest news of the last 24 hours, and that's that Patriots center David Andrews could miss the season. He reportedly was hospitalized for a blood clot in his lungs. Very serious situation for a player on the Patriots roster who's really very beloved by teammates all over the roster. He's a guy that, it doesn't really matter who you are. I think that every player on the Patriots has a pretty good relationship with David Andrews, especially I think 2 of his best friends on the team are, Tom Brady is up there, Devin McCourty, very close to all of the offensive line. So it was good to see him. He was already out at practice today, not practicing, but observing the practice. So it was just good to see him, on his feet and active out there at all.
Yeah, this is obviously a pretty serious situation and one where it's kind of even hard to sort of predict and project how long he might be out. I know the initial report from Jeff Howe said that his season is in jeopardy, and at the very least he's expected to miss a significant amount of time. So however long that may be, I know Ian Rappaport had a subsequent report that said these type of blood clot issues a lot of times take 3 months or more to sort of complete the entire recovery process, because a lot of times players have to go on blood thinners, which really affects the way that they can kind of perform and do their job in such a strenuous profession. So it does sound like, barring some kind of miracle quick recovery here, the Patriots will be without David Andrews to start the season and however long that takes into the season. So you're probably going to see Ted Karras, who's been the Patriots' top interior O-line backup. Ever since he arrived here in 2016, he'll probably slot into that starting center spot. And I know Karras is a guy that both of us like as a player. He's been solid every time he's been asked to play for the Patriots, but it hasn't been all that much. He's only started 5 games over his NFL career, started 2 games in place of Andrews a couple of years back, but a guy that doesn't have nearly as much experience in that spot, and a guy that doesn't have nearly as much kind of connection with Tom Brady. Tom Brady has mentioned several times over the years that he really loves playing with David Andrews. I know he was a big advocate for David Andrews when Andrews first took over for Brian Stork a couple years ago. So that's going to be even a little bit of an adjustment period, even though it's not like Ted Karras has never played with Tom Brady before. But when you're going from someone who has such kind of a strong connection, it's probably going to there might be a little bit of a growing pains period coming up for the Patriots.
Yeah, definitely. There's going to be a tell basically on Saturday whether or not there's going to be a chance for Andrews to come back this season. If he's or if he's placed on injured reserve at cutdown date, then he will be out for the season if the Patriots keep him on their initial roster and then put him on IR at 4 p.m. the next day. Then he could return. So we'll kind of know that in the next week or so here anyway. And yeah, I mean, Karras played right guard for 2 games last season, started at right guard for 2 games last season, started at center for 2 games in 2017. He actually played in his first ever NFL game. I think it might have been a right guard again for Shaq Mason. But
yeah, it was that Cardinals game a couple of years ago.
I think that, Karras certainly can hold up at center. I think that that's a good option to have there as your starting center if something like this comes up. But one reason for that is just that Ted Karras has been practicing with all these Patriots offensive linemen, or most of them, for his entire career and for most of their NFL careers. He's been practicing with Joe Thuney for 3 seasons. Shaq Mason came in 2015, and Marcus Cannon's not going to have to work with as much because he's going to be a body away, but Marcus Cannon's been there his whole career, so he definitely has chemistry with his offensive line. In one of the games they did start at center in 2017, there was a botched snap between Brady and Karras, so that's definitely something to watch for. I don't know if that chemistry is going to be quite as good as Andrews and Brady, but I mean, if you're talking about having a situation like this, the Patriots are set up pretty well with Karras stepping in.
It's a very good kind of fallback plan to have in place there, rather than having to bring a young player up, kind of elevate him there, or sort of go out and make a move for a veteran in that spot. Having a guy like Karras, who, like you said, has been here this is going to be his 4th season with the Patriots, so he's got as much kind of experience, maybe not with Brady himself, but definitely with his fellow offensive linemen.
The other options, just to put them out there, James Ferentz plays center and guard. He's struggled a little bit in the preseason so far. They've got an undrafted rookie named Tyler Gauthier, who's been fine in the preseason, but it's mostly been against second and third teamers. And then they've got the rookie Yelda Frohold, who,
he's a little rough.
Well, he's a little rough. Plus, I've primarily seen him play guard. He hasn't played center in a preseason game, and I don't recall him playing center very often, if at all, during training camp either.
I haven't seen them use him there at all. He did play center a little bit at Arkansas. I think he started 3 games there, but the vast majority of his experience has been at guard, and that's really the only spot we've seen him since he's been with the Patriots. So let's move on. News today was Rob Gronkowski held his event or press conference or whatever to announce what he's going to be doing in the future. It's a partnership with a CBD oil company or CBD company, but he also took questions after the announcement or whatever, and he definitely left the door pretty wide open for a return to football, which definitely surprised me. When I saw what this event was and how it was basically just a commercial, I wasn't expecting him to say anything newsworthy, but one of the first questions was about whether he was going to plan to return to football or not. And he basically said that if he gets the passion back for it, if he gets the fire back for it, then yeah, he will return. He said it won't be in the next week, it won't be in the next month, but what do you say, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, yeah.
Something like that. 3 months would be during the season.
Midway through the season, yeah.
And I don't know, there's been kind of a weirdly strong reaction to a lot of this stuff, which I found odd, but he said what he said. He opened up the possibility that that he's going to return to football. And it wasn't just oh yeah, maybe I will. There was like some, he threw in some caveats that let you know that he's actually thinking about this.
Yeah, he spoke in pretty great detail, pretty surprising detail, honestly, about how he's just kind of how these last few months have been and where he has to be to want to be back on the football field. And he said a couple of times, he's like, I may never get there. I may never get to a place where I want to come back and play football. And he said even that it's not a physical thing with him. He said, if I wanted to play right now, he said I could play right now if I wanted to, hands down, physically. Right. Which, I mean, you got to kind of take him on his word on that. But he says it's going to be an emotional, kind of spiritual, psychological thing. He has to want to put his body through the kind of abuse that he did for so many years, the kind of love for football, which he admitted that he kind of lost through a lot of these injuries. It was a lot of kind of similar themes to what we saw from Andrew Luck in his retirement news conference over the weekend. He said he needs to his desire to come back and play football has to outweigh the kind of toll that he knows it's going to take if he comes back. Now, if you want to view this all through kind of a cynical lens, you could say, well, he's now kind of promoting a CBD company, and CBD is kind of aiming at sort of it's a recovery type thing. So of course he's going to say he's feeling great now that he's on the CBD, and it's going to make him kind of look better for his brand if he is able to come back to football. And all that is kind of true, and I think all of that might be there are some pretty good points to be made in that argument. I know our colleague Mike Cole wrote a pretty good piece on NESN.com about exactly that, why he views this whole thing as it kind of increasing Rob Gronkowski's chances of coming back. But I don't think he was lying in any of this. I think he was being more honest than we've seen from Rob Gronkowski, just about how kind of painful these last couple years were for him on the football field. I don't know if he comes back. The use of these kind of repeated caveats saying, I don't know if I'm going to be ready, I don't know if I'm going to be ready, I don't know if I even want it. Right. So who knows what he's going to decide, but the fact that he left the door so clearly wide open, it wasn't just we'll talk about that down the line. He said, these are the things that I'm going to need to do if I'm going to be back on the football field. Yeah, I would probably increase the percent chance that he comes back after this. And I mean, that's not to say that he will or won't, but I do think that there's at least a higher degree possibility that he could be back after just hearing what he said today. And yeah, I mean, like you said, he really stressed that he's pain-free and that, all the recovery and everything. And there's a certain degree of acting that he was putting on, to promote this product and everything. But I think, once he started answering questions, I don't know. I kind of have to take him at face value a little bit about all the things they said about coming back. Yeah, I've seen some people out there who were like saying that he was sort of faking these emotions or kind of playing it up to the crowd. They looked like real emotions from Rob Gronkowski. He teared up a couple times in this whole kind of news conference setting, whatever you want to call it. And I honestly don't think Rob Gronkowski is a good enough actor to look as kind of sincerely emotional as he was. So I'm going to take him at his word on that. And honestly, now just this story will not die. It's not going to die for 3 years now, apparently, because it's going the possibility is going to remain open that Rob Gronkowski could come back to the New England Patriots until he definitively says, I am not coming back. And then it'll probably still even remain open after that. So this is going to be a story we're going to be talking about for quite a long time. Let's recap the Patriots-Panthers preseason game a little bit. That is that all-important third preseason game. Tom Brady did play for 3 series. Then he was backed up by Jarrett Stidham, not Brian Hoyer, which I thought was very interesting, but it's one of those things where you can look at it one of two ways. Maybe the Patriots saw all they needed to out of Brian Hoyer and know he's going to make the team, or maybe they saw all they needed to out of Brian Hoyer and know he's not going to make the team. So it's really kind of like one of those things where it was certainly newsworthy that he didn't play in the game and that they wanted to see Jarrett Stidham for 2.5 quarters out there. And I thought that Stidham's looked good all summer. I feel like there's been a lot of I don't know if criticism is the right word, but Stidham's not been perfect this summer, but he's been way better than you could possibly expect a 4th-round rookie to have been throughout training camp and throughout the preseason. He's made, a few regrettable throws in some of these preseason games. He easily could have thrown, 2 or 3 interceptions, whatever it's been, but he hasn't thrown in an interception so far. And for the most part,
he's been delivering, hard, accurate passes to wide receivers who kind of have no business in some degrees
with the exception
being
of
out
Jacoby
there.
Myers, it's basically a lot of guys who will not make the roster.
Yeah, it's Jacoby Myers and a bunch of guys who catch one pass a game, pretty much. So he really hasn't been helped out too much by his wide receivers out there, other than Jacoby Myers. So I don't know. We're going back to this discussion again, but I would have no problem one way or the other if the Patriots kept Brian Hoyer or had Jarrett Stidham as their backup quarterback this season.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how. I guess I don't know what we would. I feel like this is something that we're not even going to be able to take many kind of cues away from the final preseason game because either
it's probably going to be Stidham the whole time.
Yeah, either direction that they go in, you could say, oh well, they've seen all they need from Jarrett Stidham, or they've seen all they need from Brian Hoyer, and we don't need to see more, or they've seen all they need from Jarrett Stidham, and we know he's going to be the quarterback. Bill Belichick talked. He didn't want to get into this much after the game last Thursday, but he did talk at a bit more length about the whole situation on WEI yesterday, just kind of talking about how you distribute reps during the during the preseason, and he brought this up unprompted. The question was about how do you kind of balance. It was about the injuries because the Patriots did suffer a bunch of injuries in this game. It was how do you balance guys getting reps with guys kind of not getting hurt. And he brought up, he said, take Stidham for example. That would be a good example. When are you going to play him if you don't have any preseason games left? When are you going to play him? How do you evaluate players like that where you only have only one quarterback if you don't have any preseason games? So they do need to see Jarrett Stidham because they know Jarrett Stidham is going to be on this team regardless this season. Yeah. And unless something very, very bad happens, he's not going to play at all, most likely, unless he is the second quarterback on the team and he plays in some mop-up duty. So they do need to see everything that they can see from him right now. It's just nobody knows whether they've already seen enough to make that decision. And he's not going to come out and say, oh yeah, we're going to cut Brian in 2 weeks or we're going to trade Brian in a week. It's going to be something that we probably won't know until very shortly before cutdown.
I think, if anything, if Hoyer does play in the fourth preseason game, that would be the most interesting turn of events because maybe then at that point they're sort of auditioning him for a trade or something. If the Colts wanted to, try to trade for Brian Hoyer or something to replace Andrew Luck and to compete with Jacoby Brissett in there. But yeah, we probably won't know until cut-down date. I still think that the most likely scenario is that Hoyer sticks around.
I would agree.
But we'll just have to see. A couple other notes. Philip Dorsett played well with Tom Brady in that preseason game. Gunnar Olszewski looked good on punt returns. And then, like you said, the Patriots had a lot of injuries. Most serious one was Brandon King out for the season with a torn quad. Beyond that, it seemed like no one was injured too badly in that game, from what we could tell. I guess Keontae Davis was because he got waived and now he's on the Patriots injured reserve list. We don't know how long he'll be out for. But yeah, it seems like King and Davis were probably the most serious injuries in there.
That did seem to be the case, especially since we've seen a couple of these guys already returned to practice this week. Damian Harris was back on the practice field today. He was probably the most notable player on that list in terms of kind of impact that he's projected to have this season. He took a pretty hard hit on one of it was kind of a play fake from Jarrett Stidham. He got blown up. Not exactly sure what he hurt on the play, but
that was the thing about that game. It was all like hard hits.
Yeah.
Ben Watson took a late hit from Eric Reed. That's how he got a concussion. But then Damian Harris got blown up. That's when he came out of the game. Gunnar Olszewski got blown up. That's when he came out of the game. Lance Kendricks got smushed between two defenders. That's when he came out of the game. It wasn't like you weren't watching it and being like, oh, he, twisted his ankle or, oh, he, hurt his wrist or something. It was all just these big hits and then players just left the game.
Yeah. So obviously that's not good. Nobody likes to see kind of head injuries like that, but it does suggest that most of them will be kind of injuries that the players can recover from in a relatively short period of time. I guess you could say that, but yeah, Damian Harris being back out there at practice was definitely big there today.
Definitely. Anything else from the game that you thought was overly notable?
Not really.
Byron Cowart started.
Byron Cowart, he's a guy that I think could actually play a legitimate role on this team this year. Seeing the connection or lack thereof between Tom Brady and Jacoby Myers was definitely notable for me, especially because they have looked pretty. At least during training camp and the practices we were allowed to watch, they did seem pretty in sync, especially for a rookie receiver coming into this offense, an undrafted rookie receiver coming into this offense. But they really could not get on the same page during this game. Brady was 0 of 3 when he was throwing toward, or when he was targeting Jacoby Myers. On at least one of the plays, he was definitely in the wrong spot. Jacoby Myers sort of stopped his route because it looked like he wasn't expecting it to get the ball. And Tom Brady ended up sailing it kind of 10 yards over his head where he might have been if he had kept running. There was another play where a pass was a little bit behind Jacoby Myers. He wasn't able to pull it in. On plays like that, I kind of give the benefit of the doubt to Tom Brady.
Right.
It might have been a case where he expected Myers to sort of settle in a spot, and Myers drifted a little bit. And Jacoby Myers also had a holding call that negated a pretty big Sony Michel run. So definitely the most uneven performance of the preseason from Myers, and who ended up looking great once Jared Stidham came in the game.
Right.
I think he had 7 catches on 9 targets from Stidham over those final 2.5 quarters. But definitely shows that, as you would expect from a player in his situation, still a bit of a work in progress, still needs to get more reps with Tom Brady, still needs to sort of adjust to the NFL game. And I think to his benefit now, because the Patriots do have so many wide receivers back in Julian Edelman and Demaryius Thomas and Josh Gordon, and then even Philip Dorsett will probably be in there above him in some situations, the Patriots will get to sort of ease him in a little bit more. He's not going to be expected, I wouldn't think, to be their number 2 receiver to start the season.
Yeah, I do think that, I'm not panicking too much over that preseason game, especially since Brady and Myers had such a good connection throughout the summer, throughout training camp. So I'm definitely putting stock in the fact that they kind of struggled to connect out there, but I do still think that there is a connection between Brady and Myers that we saw throughout the summer. And I mean, this might be a conversation for another time, probably before next week, but we still don't know who the Patriots' number 3 receiver is going to be start the season. I mean, we're assuming that Julian Edelman's going to be number 1 and Josh Gordon's going to be number 2, but we don't know who that number 3 guy is going to be. Jacoby Myers, Philip Dorsett, Demaryius Thomas, N'Keal Harry, they're all in the mix there. One other piece of news regarding wide receivers is that Josh Gordon came off the NFI list. This was, kind of to be expected. We weren't sure when this was going to happen, but we could actually see him in that 4th and final preseason game, and that would make the game certainly more exciting if we saw Jarrett Stidham throwing to Josh Gordon out there.
Absolutely, yeah, because at this point we really don't know when Josh Gordon or Demaryius Thomas will actually make their debuts. I think we all
we could see Thomas too.
I think we all expect to see Julian Edelman, not in this game, but in the
week 1.
In week 1. I don't think there's much doubt about that. But with Gordon, if the Patriots feel he's not in game shape just yet, but I mean they did bring him off NFI, but if he stayed on NFI, he wouldn't be able to come back until week 7. Could be a case where they're sort of, they might want to hold him out for a week or two, just to kind of get him back into the flow. And with Demaryius Thomas, I mean, he tore his Achilles in December, so that's only 8 months ago. That's usually an injury that takes a little bit longer than that to come back from, especially for a guy who's 31 years old and has been playing football for a very long time. So there's a theoretical possibility that neither of these players could be active in week 1. The Patriots might just enter that game without both of those players. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that sort of hierarchy shakes out. Obviously, it's gonna change by the week and by the situation, but just the sort of connection that Brady still has for Philip Dorsett and the kind of love he seems to have for him. Every time you ask Tom Brady about Philip Dorsett, he just goes on and on and on about how reliable he is and how much trust he has in him. And you were able to see that the other night against the Panthers. I'm pretty sure that he's still going to be I don't know if I want to say prominent, but a sort of, he's going to have a role in this offense, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Patriots start him out as that kind of number 3 spot.
Yeah, certainly could. 3 roster moves that happened this week. Mike Pennell was cut. I don't think any of us really expected this to happen this early, and when he signed back in March, I think that we expected him to be the biggest impact player out of the Patriots' first wave of free agency.
He seemed like the best signing. That seemed like the kind of...
He had some guaranteed money in there, too, $500,000, I think, or something.
And in that first day of free agency, it was a bunch of kind of nobodies, basically. Right. And then Mike Pennell was like, Mike Pennell, all right. He's gonna be a solid... He might even be an upgrade over Malcolm Brown. Who knows? We'll see. Now he doesn't even make it to the end of the preseason. It's crazy.
And Danny Shelton's probably going to be starting in there. I don't know if the Patriots will keep another nose tackle. The most logical one would be David Perry, who had 2 good seasons with the Colts before he kind of bounced around the NFL a little bit. I think he's had a pretty decent summer out there. So maybe he's a guy who could kind of play himself onto a roster spot in the fourth and final preseason game. Other roster moves is that Maurice Harris, the wide receiver, who had a promising start to his Patriots career, and Keontae Davis, both were waived with injury designations. Both of them cleared waivers and now are on injured reserve. So they probably will get released at some point over the next few weeks with injury settlements, and then they would be free to sign to another team, or after a certain period of time, they could even come back to the Patriots. So the Maurice Harris thing, he just got hurt at the wrong time. He got hurt during joint practices with the Titans, never came back on the field, and then before he got back, before he could get healthy, Josh Gordon, Demaryius Thomas, and Julian Edelman all came back. So bad timing there for him.
Yeah, it's just a tough break for Maurice Harris, who we were both considering not a roster lock, but a guy who had a very good chance of making the roster after those first week or two of training camp. He looked like the Patriots' best wide receiver out there in camp, and then Jacoby Myers kind of had a little bit of had his sort of breakout, and Maurice Harris kind of his play dipped a little bit.
Yeah.
He wasn't nearly as kind of productive and involved after that first week and a half or so of camp, and then he had that touchdown against the Lions, but also had two kind of hit off his hands. I know they had the pass interference involved and whatnot, and then he got hurt and haven't really seen him since. So tough break for him. I'm sure I think he showed enough this summer that he'll probably get a chance elsewhere if he's healthy enough within the next couple of weeks, which I can't remember who reported, but I did see a report that his injury is not supposed to be something that sidelines him for more than a couple of weeks. So I'm sure you'll see him latch on with some roster at some point this year. But yeah, tough. It's the reality of life in the NFL, unfortunately.
Let's get into the fourth and final preseason game for a few minutes here. The most important thing for me is who's not going to play in this game, because that would mean that they would be roster locks on this team. And the guys who I have in that very near lock category were running back Brandon Bolden, Josh Gordon, but that was kind of for extenuating circumstances, Jacoby Myers, tight end Ryan Izzo, tight end Ben Watson, offensive lineman Ted Karras, defensive tackle Adam Butler, defensive tackle Byron Coward, outside linebacker John Simon, linebacker Juwan Bentley, linebacker Jamie Collins, safety Terrence Brooks, safety Nate Ebner, and safety Duron Harmon. If any of those 14 guys sit out the entire game, then they're basically going to be making the roster. And I some guys on this list might wind up playing, and they might still make the roster. So it's not a death knell for them to actually get in this game. But if they don't play, if they're kind of happy and smiling on the sideline, that means that they made the team.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you could see maybe some guys on that list, maybe a guy like Coward or someone like Terrence Brooks end up playing in this game and still end up making the team. We do see that happen every year. There are a few guys who kind
Jacoby
of
Myers,
The Patriots haven't really shown any need for kind of protecting Jacoby Myers so far this year, because he has played basically the entire game in the last two preseason games. So yeah, you could definitely see him out there. And again, when you're watching this game, don't look at it as this guy's playing and he's absolutely getting cut. Like we saw Jason McCourty play, I think it was 17 snaps at safety in this game last year, and we were all kind of thinking maybe he's not going to be on this team. And then he obviously ended up making the team and ended up having a pretty solid season. So, but if they do sit out this game and like you said, if they pan to him on the sideline and they've got their sneakers on and just hanging out and yucking it up, then there's a very, very good chance that they will be on this 53-man roster.
As far as bubble guys go, that's a much longer list, so I'm not going to read off the whole list here, but I'd say that if Philip Dorsett doesn't play, that's definitely a very good sign for him. Looking down this list, I mean, if Dietrich Wise doesn't play, that would be a good sign for him. If Calvin Munson or Landon Roberts don't play, that would be good signs for them. Keon Cross and Duke Dawson I also have here on the roster bubble. So yeah, and then I do think that the Andrews injury also opens up a spot for maybe one or two more offensive linemen on this roster as well. We do expect Ted Karras to be that starting center. We expect Yelda Froholt to make the roster. That, including the other starters, is only 6 offensive linemen. So I'm thinking that Cole Croston might have a better chance to make the roster now because he can play tackle and guard. James Ferentz might sneak his way on because he can play guard and center. Tyler Gauthier, like I said earlier, he's been pretty good at center during the preseason. Maybe he could sneak on. Dan Skipper's been that swing tackle. Maybe he can get on there. Tyree St. Louis, I should say. He's been mostly at right tackle, but he's had some good moments. So, one or two or even three of those guys could actually sneak on the roster now.
Definitely, especially because since, as we mentioned before, we haven't seen Yelda Froholt play at center at all.
Yeah.
And just with the way that he's played so far in this preseason, he's had his moments, but he's been pretty raw. He has a lot of he's had 4 holding penalties or 4 penalties or total penalties rather, and he just doesn't look ready at the moment. I still think he has pretty good potential. I still think he can be a good player for the Patriots, maybe even next season or later this season, but I don't know if they would want to go into the season with him as their kind of primary interior backup. So I could definitely see someone like Ferentz, who, as we mentioned, hasn't played well this summer, but he's been playing mostly at guard, which isn't really his natural position. He's much more kind of accustomed to being at center. I could see him sticking around. I could see Tyler Gauthier sticking around, or at the very least, you would expect that a few of these guys are going to be
one
on the
of those tackles.
squad.
Yeah, Cole Croston or Dan Skipper probably going to make the roster at this point. But yeah, I mean, Ferentz.
You need someone in there who can play center because they don't have a backup center if Ted Karras is their starting center.
Tooney, I guess, but Ferentz or Gauthier is probably making the roster at this point, just because even if he's not a guy who's going to be active, you don't really want to risk not getting someone on the practice squad and then having to basically start all over with a center coming off waivers. So it'll definitely be interesting. That's what we'll be paying most attention to, barely the action on the field, but just who is and isn't playing in that game. That will do it for this week's NESN Patriots podcast. Keep it on NESN.com for all of your Patriots coverage. Follow Zach on Twitter at ZachCoxNESN. Follow me at Doug Kide. And we will be back after roster cuts to talk about that initial 53-man roster for the Patriots.